There are men who seem to glow from within. Men who, when they walk into a room, make the whole place feel warmer, brighter, like someone turned up the sun just a little. And then there are the same men, in private, in the dark, in the last weeks of their lives, who are forced to make choices so painful that even the people who love them most will spend decades trying to understand what happened. What does a man do when he has given the world everything, every laugh, every tear, every frame of every story he ever told, and then realizes the world will keep spinning long after he is gone? What does he leave behind? And more importantly, what does he choose to protect? He was born Eugene Maurice Orowitz on October 31st, 1936, in Forest Hills, Queens, New York. Halloween. Even the date of his birth had a kind of theatrical timing to it, as though the universe was already winking. His father, Eli Orowitz, was a Jewish theater manager, a man who loved the performing arts but lived a life that felt perpetually out of sync with his own ambitions. His mother, Peggy O'Neill, was Irish Catholic, a woman of beauty and volatility in equal measure, a woman whose moods could fill a room with sunshine or drain it of all warmth inside of a single breath. The house they raised their children in was not a stable place. It was a place where love existed but was expressed poorly, where tension was a constant low hum in the walls, where a sensitive boy could feel the weather of his parents' marriage long before any storm actually broke. Michael, Eugene, back then, was a quiet child with enormous dark eyes and a brain that absorbed everything around him. He was small for his age. He was not the boy who ruled the playground. He was the boy who watched from the edges, who listened to adult conversations he was not supposed to hear, who went to bed at night with a kind of anxious awareness that most children his age did not carry. His sister had already suffered. She had a nervous breakdown when Michael was still very young, and the memory of watching her deteriorate, watching his family fracture under the weight of that, never fully left him. He carried it the way people carry old injuries, not always feeling it, but always knowing it was there. His mother's illness was different, more unpredictable. Peggy Orowitz suffered from severe depression, and she managed it, or failed to manage it, in ways that made young Eugene feel like the ground beneath his feet was never entirely solid. There were mornings he would come downstairs and not know which version of his mother he would find. There were nights when her behavior was so erratic, so frightening, that the boy would lie awake wondering if something terrible was about to happen. And then there were other times, brief and precious, when she was radiant, funny, tender, when she would hold him close and the world would feel almost manageable. Those were the moments he chased his entire life. That warmth, that safety, that sense that love could hold you up rather than drag you under. The family moved to Collingswood, New Jersey when Michael was in grade school, and it was there that the defining wound arrived, not with a bang, but with the slow accumulating pressure of a childhood that offered no soft landings. Peggy Orowitz was not just unstable. She was actively cruel in her cruelest moments. She made her son feel ashamed, not of anything specific, not of any particular failing, but of himself, of his sensitivity, of his emotions, of the very qualities that would one day make him one of the most empathetic storytellers in the history of American television. She mocked him, she belittled him, and she did something else, something that left a mark so deep that Michael would struggle with it for the rest of his life. She threatened him with her own disappearance. She would tell him, in moments of rage or despair, that she was going to kill herself. She weaponized her own fragility. She made her son responsible for keeping her alive. Try to imagine what that does to a child. Try to imagine waking up each morning carrying the weight of another person's survival. Try to imagine spending your adolescence in a state of hypervigilance so total that you never fully learned how to relax, how to trust, how to believe that the people you loved would still be there when you turned around. That was the foundation Michael Landon was built on. Not cruelty. He never became cruel, but anxiety, and an enormous, aching need to be loved without conditions, without threats, without the constant fear of abandonment. He wanted, more than almost anything, to create a world where people were safe, where families were good, where fathers showed up. You can hear it in every show he ever made. You can feel it in every character he ever played. The warmth was real, but it was also a wound doing its best impression of a dream. It got worse before it got better. In high school, Michael Orowitz was a bedwetter, a fact he would eventually disclose publicly with a frankness that shocked people, because men of his generation simply did not talk about such things. But Michael talked about it because he understood what it meant. The bedwetting was not a physical problem. It was the body's response to a life lived in chronic fear. Every morning was a small humiliation. Every sleepover was a landmine. Every friendship carried with it the terror of exposure. He hid it with the skill of someone who had learned to hide everything, and the effort of that hiding, the constant management of shame, exhausted him in ways that had no name. He was isolated. He was embarrassed. He was the Jewish kid with the strange last name and the unpredictable mother and the secret he could not tell anyone. And then, almost by accident, he found something that changed the entire trajectory of his life. He threw a javelin, not metaphorically, literally. A gym teacher handed him a javelin during track practice, and when Eugene Orowitz released it into the afternoon air of a New Jersey high school, something happened that neither of them quite expected. It went far, very far, farther than anyone had seen a high school kid throw one in years. And in that moment, in the pure, clean arc of that javelin against the sky, something in the boy shifted. He had found the one thing he was better at than almost everyone else. He had found a reason to stay. The javelin became his ticket. He trained obsessively, the way only someone who has been humiliated deeply can train, with a fury that looks like passion from the outside, but is really a kind of running, a desperate sprint away from everything that has hurt you. He broke records. He earned a track scholarship to the University of Southern California. He packed his bags, and he left New Jersey, and he drove toward California the way a person drives toward a different version of themselves, hoping the distance will be enough to make the old self disappear. It was not enough. Of course it was not enough. It never is. A torn ligament ended his athletic career before it truly began. He arrived at USC on a scholarship built on a body that then betrayed him, and when the javelin was gone, he was left standing in the California sun with nothing but the same old wounds dressed up in new geography. He dropped out. He drifted. He took small jobs. He lived in his car for a stretch. He was 20 years old, and the future felt like a door he had been pressing against for years that simply refused to open. And then someone told him to audition. He had no formal training. He had no particular reason to believe he could act. But he walked into that audition room with the total unself-consciousness of someone who has already lost everything he was trying to protect, and something extraordinary happened. He was good. He was natural. The camera found something in him, that enormous emotional availability, that open-wound quality that he had spent his whole life trying to conceal, and instead of hiding it, the camera held it gently and said, "This is what we came to see." He got a small role, then another. He changed his name. Eugene Orowitz became Michael Landon, a name he chose partly from a phone book, partly because it sounded like someone from a different story, someone lighter and freer than the boy from Collingswood, New Jersey. And then, in 1959, at the age of 22, he walked onto the set of a new Western called Bonanza and became Little Joe Cartwright, and 14 years of American television history began. Bonanza was a phenomenon. In an era when Westerns dominated the television landscape, it was something different, warmer, more character-driven, more focused on family than on gunfights. The Cartwrights of the Ponderosa were not just cowboys. They were a family. And Michael Landon, as the youngest of the Cartwright sons, brought to that family something that viewers responded to with an immediacy that surprised even the producers. He was genuinely, vulnerably, completely real. The tears he cried on screen were not performed tears. The love he expressed was not manufactured. He had spent 22 years learning exactly what it felt like to need a good father, and now he was being paid to live inside that fantasy every week, and the whole country wanted to watch. The show ran from 1959 to 1973. For much of that run, it was the #1 show in America. Michael Landon became a household name, a face so familiar it was almost familial, the kind of face you felt you already knew, already trusted, already loved. He was beautiful in the way that certain people are beautiful, not just in their features but in their energy, in the sense they project that the world is a fundamentally good place and they have decided to live in it fully, without apology. But even at the height of Bonanza's success, the private life was complicated. He had married his first wife, Dodie Fraser, young, too young, really, the way people marry when they are trying to build a shelter from something rather than toward something. They had children together, and Michael loved his children with a ferocity that was unmistakable. But the marriage did not survive. He fell in love with another woman, Lynn No, while he was still married to Dodie, and the affair became public, and the divorce was painful, and the tabloids descended with the particular cruelty of tabloids in the 1970s, and for a moment the golden image flickered. He married Lynn in 1963. They had children together. For a long stretch, it seemed like the life he had always wanted. The big house, the children, the career, the sense of having built something solid in the world. But there was a restlessness in Michael Landon that never fully quieted. A hunger, not for fame or money or professional success. He had all of those in abundance. It was something older than any of that. Something that went all the way back to Collingswood, New Jersey, to the boy lying awake wondering if his mother would still be there in the morning. When Bonanza ended in 1973, Michael did not take time off. He could not take time off. Taking time off meant being alone with himself, and being alone with himself meant facing things he was not ready to face. So instead, he created Little House on the Prairie. He wrote it. He directed it. He starred in it. He produced it. He controlled every frame of it with a dedication that bordered on obsession, because Little House on the Prairie was not just a television show. It was a corrective. It was the childhood he had wanted. It was Charles Ingalls, the father who showed up, who was kind, who told his daughters they were loved, who built things with his hands and his heart and never once threatened to disappear. Charles Ingalls was the father Michael Landon had needed. Michael Landon was giving that father to millions of children who needed him too. The show ran from 1974 to 1983, 9 years, and it was beloved with an intensity that is difficult to explain to someone who did not grow up watching it. Beloved not just as entertainment, but as a kind of moral touchstone, a weekly reminder that goodness was possible and family was worth protecting, and the hard things in life could be survived with enough love. Michael received thousands of letters. Not from fans exactly. From people who felt that Charles Ingalls had somehow reached through the screen and held their hand during a difficult time. Children who had lost parents. Parents who had lost children. Families who were struggling. People who needed to believe in a world where fathers were strong and gentle and always came home. He gave them that. For 9 years, he gave them that. And then came the scandal that reframed everything. In 1982, while still married to Lynn, Michael Landon began an affair with his children's makeup artist, Cindy Clerico. She was nearly 20 years younger than him. She was present on set every day. The relationship was not discreet. It became public knowledge, and the fallout was significant. Not because Hollywood marriages had not survived worse, but because Michael Landon had spent nearly a decade presenting himself as the embodiment of family values, as Charles Ingalls, as the father of the American heartland. The hypocrisy was impossible to ignore. The tabloids went to work with a thoroughness that was almost surgical. Lynn filed for divorce. The divorce was bitter and public, and the details were not kind to anyone involved. Michael married Cindy in 1983, the same year Little House ended its run. And here is where the story becomes something more complicated than a simple tale of a man caught between the life he performed and the life he lived. Because Michael Landon did not retreat. He did not apologize his way into obscurity. He came back. He created Highway to Heaven in 1984, and he starred in it as Jonathan Smith, an angel on a probationary period, trying to earn his wings back by doing good in the world. The premise was not subtle, but the execution was something else. Highway to Heaven was gentle and warm and earnest and unafraid, and it ran for 5 seasons, and people watched it with the same devotion they had brought to Little House. Michael Landon was not destroyed by the scandal. He was complicated by it, and the complication made him, somehow, more human, more watchable, more honest. His faith, something he had developed slowly, privately, over years of reading and thinking and facing the specific fears of a man who grew up with no reliable ground beneath him, deepened during this period. He was not evangelical about it. He did not wear it as a badge. But those who knew him well in the late 1980s say he had arrived at something. A kind of peace with the impermanence of things, a willingness to trust that the story was longer than any single chapter of it. He talked about God not as an institution, but as a presence. Not as a judge, but as a companion. He had spent his childhood being threatened with abandonment. In his faith, he found the opposite of that, the idea that he would never be entirely alone. He and Cindy had children together. He was, by all accounts, a devoted husband and father in this final chapter of his life. He had learned from his failures, not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. He coached his kids' sports teams. He showed up. The man who had spent his professional life playing the ideal father was finally, painstakingly, becoming something closer to it in real life. And then, in January of 1991, Michael Landon went to the doctor with what he thought was a persistent backache. He was 54 years old. He was planning his next project. He was, by every external measure, at the beginning of another act. The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind of diagnosis that is not really a diagnosis so much as a timeline. He had, the doctors told him, weeks to months. What Michael Landon did next was remarkable and, to some people who loved him, shattering. He went public. He did not hide. He called a press conference in April of 1991, and he sat in front of the cameras, the same cameras he had spent 40 years learning to trust, and he told the world what was happening to him. He was thin. He was pale. The famous dark hair had already begun to change, but his eyes were the same, still enormous, still warm. Still completely, vulnerably present. He said he was going to fight. He said he was not afraid. He said that whatever happened, he was grateful. He meant all of it, and none of it was the whole story. Because in private, in the weeks that followed, Michael Landon made a wish, a final request, that his family has spoken about only in fragments, in the way people speak about things that still hurt too much to examine completely. He asked that when he died, the memorial be private, small, just family, no press, no cameras, no public spectacle. He who had lived his entire adult life under the glare of other people's attention, who had built empires of storytelling on the willingness to be seen. He wanted to leave quietly. He wanted the end to belong only to the people he loved. He wanted, finally, to be only a man, not an icon, not a symbol, not Charles Ingalls, or Little Joe, or Jonathan the Angel. Just Michael. Just Eugene. Just the boy from Collingswood, New Jersey, who had thrown a javelin into the sky one afternoon and decided to keep going. His family honored his wish. When Michael Landon died on July 1st, 1991, at his home in Malibu, California, surrounded by his children and his wife Cindy, the world learned of it only after the fact. There was no dramatic farewell broadcast. There was no public vigil. There was a man, and there was a family, and there were the sounds of a Malibu summer, the surf, the birds, the ordinary music of a world that does not pause for even the most extraordinary departures. His children have spoken over the years about those final weeks in ways that are both heartbreaking and strangely beautiful. They speak of a father who told them everything he needed them to know, who held their hands, who was not afraid of the silence. His daughter Jennifer has spoken about the way he would sit in the Malibu sunlight in his final days and just look at the ocean. That same Pacific Ocean that he had driven toward as a 20-year-old with a torn ligament and a borrowed dream. That ocean that had witnessed the whole extraordinary arc of what a boy from Queens could become if he simply refused to stop. The javelin, the flight of it, the moment of release. That was how Michael Landon moved through the world, in long, arcing trajectories, trusting the air to hold him. And in the end, he trusted it one more time. His legacy is enormous and obvious in some ways. The 3 iconic shows, the decades of Sunday nights, the millions of people who feel they grew up inside the Ponderosa or the banks of Plum Creek, who feel that Charles Ingalls was a real man who taught them something real about how to love a family. That legacy is genuine and lasting and belongs to everyone who ever watched. But the final wish was something else. It was the thing beneath the legacy. It was the truth that the performance had always been gesturing toward. He had spent 54 years learning how to be seen. And in the end, what he wanted, what he needed, was the grace of being unseen, of belonging to just a few people, of being loved not because of what he had created, but because of who he was when the cameras were off. That is the thing that left his family in tears. Not the dying. People die. Not even the speed of it, though the speed was brutal and unfair and left so much unsaid. What left them in tears was the intimacy of it, the smallness of it, the way a man who had been so large in the world chose, at the end, to become very small and very quiet and very much himself. And now I want to speak directly to you. You have been sitting with this story for a while now, and I suspect something in it has touched something in you. Maybe it is the image of the little boy lying awake at night, listening for his mother's footsteps, carrying a weight no child should carry. Maybe it is the javelin, that one afternoon when everything changed, when the world proved it had something for him after all. Maybe it is the final wish, the man who wanted to leave quietly, who wanted the ending to belong only to the people he loved. Here is what I want you to take from this. And it is not a lesson in the neat, packaged way that lessons usually come. Michael Landon built his entire career out of the wounds his childhood gave him. Every scene of warmth he ever filmed, every tear, every quiet moment between a father and a daughter on a prairie in the long golden light of a 19th century afternoon, all of it came from a boy who needed those things and never quite received them in the way he needed. He turned the hunger into the art. And the art fed millions of people who had their own hungers, their own quiet lacks, their own versions of lying awake wondering if the person they loved was still going to be there in the morning. You have your own wounds. You know what they are, even if you have never said them out loud. And the question Michael Landon's story asks you, the question that the arc of that javelin against the sky has always asked, is not whether the wound will define you. It will define you. The question is what you will do with the definition, what you will build from it, who you will become because of it. And the final wish, the quiet ending, the request to be seen only by the people who truly knew him. There is something in that, something worth carrying with you, because you will be seen by thousands of people in your life, or by dozens, or by just a handful. And the size of that audience is not the measure of the life. The measure is whether the people closest to you, the ones in the room at the end, know the real you. The one beneath the performance. The one who threw the javelin. The one who was afraid and showed up anyway. Michael Landon died with that ocean outside his window, that same Pacific that had witnessed everything. And the last thing he wanted was to be exactly where he was, with exactly the people he loved, with no camera running. Is there something in your own life that you have been performing for too long? Is there a room you have been trying to fill when really what you needed was just to sit quietly with a few people who know your name? The javelin always lands somewhere. The question is whether you are paying attention when it does.